Picture this. You are standing on the edge of the world, or at least that's what it felt like to the men and boys who were dragged here in chains 200 years ago. The air is crisp, biting at your cheeks, carrying the salt spray from the Tasman Sea, and the landscape. God, the landscape is deceptively beautiful. It's lush, green, almost romantic in the way the ruins crumble against the skyline of the Tasman Peninsula. But close your eyes for a second. Just shut them. Can you hear it? Underneath the sound of tourists snapping photos and the wind rustling through the oaks, there is a heavy, suffocating silence. This isn't just an old building. It is a scar on the face of humanity. We are talking about Port Arthur, Australia. Today, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a place for family vacations and ghost tours. But once, not so long ago, this was the hell on earth. It was the place where the British Empire sent the men they wanted to break, not just in body, but in soul. It was a machine designed to grind a human being down until there was nothing left but a husk. And the scariest part, it wasn't chaos that ruled here. It was order. Cold, calculated, scientific cruelty. You have to understand the sheer psychological terror of this place. Most prisons in history were about physical punishment, dungeons, lashings, the gallows. And sure, Port Arthur had plenty of that. But the British, in their infinite wisdom and arrogance, decided to try something new here. They didn't just want to punish the body. They wanted to surgically alter the mind. They called it the model prison. Doesn't that sound nice? Model. Like it's something to aspire to. But the reality was a nightmare that George Orwell couldn't have even dreamed up. Imagine being locked in a cell where you are never allowed to speak. Not a whisper, not a grunt, not a prayer aloud. The silent system. Men were forced to wear hoods, masks made of heavy cloth, with only tiny slits for eyes whenever they stepped out of their cells. They were nameless, faceless ghosts shuffling through corridors, forbidden to look at each other, forbidden to communicate. If you coughed too loudly, you were punished. If you tapped on the wall, you were punished. They wanted to force these men to look inward, to reflect on their crimes, but instead, they just drove them mad. It is said that the silence in the separate prison was so heavy, so absolute, that men would beg for the lash just to hear a human sound, even if it was their own scream. Now let's rewind a bit and talk about how someone ended up here. We tend to think of convicts as these hardened, evil monsters, right? Murderers, rapists, the worst of the worst. And sure, some of them were, but history is written by the victors, and the British Empire was very good at criminalizing poverty. You could be sent to the other side of the world for stealing a loaf of bread, for poaching a rabbit to feed your starving family, or for stealing a handkerchief. Imagine that, a handkerchief. And for that, you are thrown onto a rotting wooden ship, crammed into the dark hold like livestock for months, surviving disease and filth, only to arrive at the fatal shore. And once you arrived in Australia, if you messed up again, if you rebelled, if you tried to run, you were sent to Port Arthur. This was the end of the line. There was no worse place to go. If you were here, society had already decided you were garbage. And the psychological weight of that, knowing you were discarded, forgotten, thousands of miles from anyone who ever loved you, that is a heaviness that I don't think we can truly comprehend today. We complain when the Wi-Fi is slow. These men were living in a literal void at the edge of the known universe. Let's walk through the geography of this nightmare. Port Arthur is located on the Tasman Peninsula, connected to the mainland by a tiny strip of land called Eaglehawk Neck. It's a natural prison. The waters surrounding it are freezing, and according to the legends the guards told the convicts, infested with sharks. But the guards didn't just rely on sharks. Oh no. At Eaglehawk Neck, they set up a line of dogs, savage, starving dogs, chained across the narrow isthmus. If you tried to swim, the sharks got you. If you tried to run across the land, the dogs would tear you apart. It was a trap designed by nature and perfected by man. And inside this trap, the labor was backbreaking. We are talking about timber getting hauled by human mules, men chained together, dragging massive tree trunks through thick mud, day in and day out. Their leg irons would gnaw into their flesh until the bone was exposed. Infection was rampant. The food was barely LED gruel. And the lash, the cat o' nine tails. It wasn't just a whip. It was a tool of mutilation. Being flogged meant having the skin stripped from your back until it looked like raw meat. And they would salt the wounds afterward. Not to torture you, they claimed, but to prevent infection. The cruelty was always dressed up as necessity. But if you think the suffering of the men is hard to hear, wait until I tell you about Point Puer. This is the part that really breaks you. Point Puer was the boys' prison. Yes, you heard me right. Boys, children, some as young as 9 years old. 9. Think about a 9-year-old you know. Maybe your nephew, your son, your little brother. Now imagine him in heavy chains, transported across the world because he stole a toy or some food. Point Puer was the first purpose-built reformatory for boys in the British Empire. The idea was to save them from the corruption of the older convicts. But saving them looked a lot like torture. They were worked like adults. They were punished like adults. There is a story, a documented tragedy, of 2 little boys at Point Puer. They were so hopeless, so utterly broken by the brutality and the isolation that they made a pact. They went to a high cliff overlooking the sea, and they jumped, together, holding hands. Children choosing death over another day of reformation. When you walk the grounds of Point Puer today, the wind feels different. It feels heavy with the stolen childhoods of thousands of boys who never stood a chance. It makes you question everything about the so-called civilization that built this place. And this is where I get a little heated, honestly. We look back at history with this arrogant detachment, thinking, oh, those were barbaric times. We are so much better now. Are we? Are we really? Port Arthur was a progressive experiment. It was built by the intellectuals of the day, the Jeremy Benthams, the social reformers, who thought they had cracked the code on human behavior. They thought that by isolating people, by breaking their spirit with silence and labor, they could fix them. It was science without a soul. It was bureaucracy applied to human suffering. And don't we see that today? We might not use the cat o' nine tails, but we still build systems that crush the poor, that criminalize desperation, that lock people away and throw away the key. Port Arthur isn't just a museum. It's a mirror. It shows us what happens when authority is absolute and empathy is removed from the equation. The commandants of Port Arthur weren't cackling villains, wringing their hands. They were men who went home to their wives, played with their children, and wrote reports about efficiency and discipline. That is the banality of evil. The man who ordered the lash was just doing his job. The man who designed the silent cell thought he was doing God's work. That is terrifying. Here is a harsh truth that might make some people uncomfortable. The British Empire was a machine of trauma. We talk about the glory of the empire, the railways, the trade, but places like Port Arthur were the engine room. The wealth of the colonies was built on the broken backs of these men and the stolen land of the indigenous people. And speaking of the land, you have to wonder, does the land remember? The indigenous Palawa people knew this area long before the British arrived. To them, it was a place of resources, of life. The British turned it into a place of death. And after the prison closed in 1877, they tried to rename the town Carnarvon to wash away the stain. They wanted to turn it into a nice tourist resort. Can you imagine the audacity? Trying to put a fresh coat of paint on a torture chamber? But the name didn't stick. The darkness was too deep. You can't just rename a graveyard and call it a playground. The ghosts, whether you believe in literal spirits or just the lingering energy of trauma, they don't leave just because you change the sign on the door. There is a specific spot in the prison, the parsonage, which is considered one of the most haunted houses in Australia. People report smelling rotting flesh when there is nothing there. They hear children laughing when the site is empty. They feel hands pushing them. Now, I'm a skeptic about a lot of things, but when you have thousands of people over dozens of years reporting the exact same sensations, you have to pause. Is it just mass hysteria? Or is it that when you saturate a place with that much pain, that much fear, it stains the very stones? The prison we talked about earlier, the silent one, visitors often break down weeping there for no reason. Perfectly happy people walk into those corridors and are overcome with a wave of despair so black they have to leave. It's like the silence of those men is still screaming in the walls. We love to consume true crime and dark tourism as entertainment, but walking through Port Arthur isn't entertainment. It's an assault on the senses. It forces you to confront the reality that humans are capable of doing this to each other. And not just capable, we are good at it. We are efficient at it. Let's talk about the Isle of the Dead. Just off the coast of the main prison complex, there is a small island. This was the cemetery. It is estimated that over 1,000 people are buried there. But here's the kicker. Most of them are in unmarked graves. The officers and the free people got headstones. They got names, dates, a rest in peace. The convicts, they were dumped in the ground, anonymous. Even in death, they were denied their identity. They were just numbers in a ledger. 1,646 deaths were recorded at Port Arthur. Think about that number. 1,646 lives extinguished in this cold, damp corner of the world. And for what? Did it reduce crime in London? Did it make the world safer? Or was it just a way to sweep the rubbish of society under the rug? When you stand on the Isle of the Dead and look back at the prison, you realize that the real prison wasn't the stone walls. The real prison was the class system. The real prison was the indifference of the powerful. And we cannot talk about Port Arthur without acknowledging the other shadow that hangs over it, the 1996 massacre. I won't go into the gory details of that day, because that is not the story we are telling right now. And frankly, the perpetrator doesn't deserve our breath. But it is impossible to ignore that this place, which was founded on violence, became the site of Australia's worst modern tragedy. It feels fateful, like a magnet for darkness. After the massacre, there was a debate. Should they bulldoze the whole site? Should they erase Port Arthur from the map? It was too much pain for one place to hold. But they decided to keep it. They decided to tell the story. And I think that was the right choice. Because if we erase the evidence of our cruelty, we are doomed to repeat it. We have to look at it. We have to stand in the ruins of the penitentiary, look at the metal bars, and own it. This is us. This is humanity. The beauty of the landscape and the ugliness of the history are tied together in a knot that can't be untied. So, what do we do with this information? Why am I telling you this story today? Is it just to depress you? No. It's because we need to understand the resilience of the human spirit. Despite everything, despite the leg irons, the lashes, the silence, the isolation, men survived. Some even escaped. Martin Cash, the famous bushranger, he swam the shark-infested waters. He beat the system. People found ways to communicate in the silent prison, using secret codes tapped out with their fingers. They found ways to smuggle tobacco. They found ways to keep a tiny spark of rebellion alive in a place designed to snuff it out. That is what moves me. You can build the perfect machine to crush a man, but there is something in us, some stubborn, wild spark that refuses to be extinguished. Port Arthur is a monument to cruelty, yes, but it is also a monument to survival. It is a testament to the fact that you can strip a man of everything, his name, his voice, his freedom, but you cannot fully own his soul. As the sun sets over the ruins of Port Arthur today, the sandstone glows a warm, honey gold. It looks peaceful. The water is calm. The horror seems far away. But if you listen to the Twilight Whispers, if you really tune in, you realize that the past isn't gone. It's just waiting. It's waiting for us to acknowledge it. We are the witnesses now. The men who died there, the boys who jumped from the cliff, they have no voice left but ours. So the next time you hear about tough on crime policies, or you see someone being dehumanized because they are poor or other, remember the silent cells. Remember the masks. Remember that the line between civilization and barbarism is much thinner than we like to admit. And it is our job, yours and mine, to make sure that the ghosts of Port Arthur remain history and don't become our future. That's a heavy journey we just took together, my friend. It's not easy to look into the abyss, but I think it's necessary. I'd love to know what you're thinking right now. Does the idea of the silent system terrify you as much as it terrifies me? Or do you think there are modern equivalents we are ignoring? Would you like me to dive deeper into the stories of the specific escapes? The men who actually beat the sharks and the dogs in a future story? Let me know. Until then, keep listening to the whispers.